Okay, welcome back, everyone. This wonderful night of Hoyd Shebahoyd on the Hilula de Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. What better way to start such a glorious day and such a glorious week than to learn Torah Hashem, to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Dibarta Bam, La'asos Nachas Ruach Liyotzreinu, as we welcome in Yehuda from Yerushalayim. And we are holding now on the second daf as we begin on the bottom of Pei Bava Metzia, bottom line. So, Ma'ishno legabi Avram, when it came to Avram, the Chsiv came to Asek Asher Dibarta, that the Malach said when Avram invited him, yes, so we will do like you ask. Or Ma'ishno legabi Lot, that when he was invited by Lot, the Chsiv Lot had to really press them exceedingly. Vayifzer bam ma'id. He needed to press exceedingly. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Mekan shemisarvin lekatan. You could refuse a small person like Lot, but ve'ein misarvin legadol. But you cannot refuse a big person. Chsiv, it says ve'ekcha pas lechem. I will take bread, but and it says Chsiv el abaka ratz Avram. So which one is? He said he'll give them a little bread. It sounds like he'd give them, a morsel of bread, and then he serves them a royal feast with tongue and mustard. Amar Rebbe Mekanshet Tzadikim Omer Ma'at. Tzadikim say a little, but v'oisen harba, but they do a lot. Risham, the wicked, Omer Ma'aba, they promise a lot. V'afilu Ma'at einon oisen. They don't even do a little. Minolan, Me'efraim. Ephraim, when it came to the buying the Marsa Machmela, may Karksiv Eretz Abba Meir Shekel Kasef, a land worth 400 Shekel Kasef, Beinia Beinecha Maihi. What is it? Just take it. Ula B'Saif Ksiv, not only did he take it, but V'yishma Avram el Ephraim, V'yishkal Avram le Ephraim, as a Kasef Asher Diber Baz Nebnei Ches. The money which was said in the Irshad of the people of Bnei Ches, Arba Meir Shekel Kesef, 400 Shekel Kesef, Oiver La Seicher, that is acceptable by all merchants. Now, there was a huge coin called a kantore. Now, some people, when they said shekel, they referred to kantore. And since the loy shekel minei ala kantore, Ephraim wouldn't take regular shkarim. He would take only kantare, the ikaduchte, the karle, the tikla kantare, because there's a place that calls tikle the heavy kantarim. And therefore, not only did he not give it to him as a gift, but he didn't even accept 400 shkalim, he took 400 kantarim. As we welcome in Abe Arbach, joining us for our 27th Zoomer of this evening on our second daf now on Pei Zayin, Kapuz Rav, like the most expensive gold. How lucky we are to follow in the footsteps of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and to dedicate our evening to Hashem's wondrous Torah. Ksiv Kemach, it says meal, uksiv silas, and it says fine flour. So Avram Avinu told Sarah, fine flour. A woman is more stingy towards the guest than a man, and therefore he had to tell her fine flour. Ksiv lushi vasi ugais, knead and make cakes. Now we know that it's referring to matzah, that's why it's called ugos. It was Erev Pesach, and that explains why, although Sarah Imenu was 89 years old, he had to tell her lushi, knead. When do you have to tell your wife knead? She'd get insulted. She knows she has to knead. So the Tamim Minhagim says that it is because he was reminding her it's Erev Pesach and she should constantly knead the dough that it shouldn't become chametz. But the problem is that he never brought them the matzah. He took the butter, the milk, and the cattle. But he didn't bring the bread. Why not? Amar Ephraim Aksha Talmid Shel Rameir Mishmei Rameir. Ephraim Aksha, the disciple of Meir, said in the name Rameir, Avram Avinu Eichel Chulin B'Tarah. He even ate chulin in purity. And while she was working, she once again saw her menstruancy. So she was a nida, and she made the bread tameh. V'sari meinu oisa yom pirsa nida. She made it tameh, and therefore, since he wouldn't eat it, he wouldn't serve it to his guests. Vayomer elav, and they said to him, Aye Sarah ishtecha. Where is Sarah, your wife? Vayomer, and he said, Hinei ba'oyel. Now, they knew where she was. They were malachim. They knew where she was. But the idea they wanted to endear Sari Menu to Avram, even though they were married already about 74 years. But the idea Sari Menu Tznuya, to endear her to him, to tell her that, to point out that she was modest. Amar Rabbi Yudah Amar Ravi, same Rabbi Yitzchak. Yoidim hayu malachi ashar shesari meinu ba'oyel haisa. They knew that Sari Meinu was in the tent. Elamai ba'oyel kedei lechava va'al baila, to endear her to her husband. Rabbi Yosef ben Chanina amar kedei l'shager l'kais shel bracha. They wanted to send her the cup of benching, that it should aid her in fertility. Tani mishum Rabbi Yossi lama nokid al ayoy shebe elav. It says that he said elav. Why on the kudus on the word elav? Lim the Torah derech eretz. The Torah teaches derech eretz sheyishal adam b'achsanya shalai, that a person should acquire after the hostess, and therefore the nekudas over elav take away the words to him and emphasize that they should remember her, to ask her about her. Says Gemara, wait a second, you're not supposed to inquire about a married woman. You're not supposed to inquire about a married woman. Says Gemara, al yedei ba'al shani, you could do it through her husband. So Sari Meinu said, Achrei v'loisi, after I'm withered, hoisali edna, I will again have youthful skin. Amar Rav Chisda, achashin is bola habasar, after the flesh becomes dried out, v'rabu akmotim, and the wrinkles have become many in old age, nisad nabasar, will the flesh become smooth, v'nispashba kmotim. No, this is not. The Rav Chisda says this is exactly what happened. Rav Chisda achash in his bala habasar, after her flesh was dried out, v'rabo akmotim, and there were many wrinkles. Nisadei nabasar, the flesh became smooth. V'nispashdu akmotim, the wrinkles smoothed out. V'chazar hayofi l'mekaymai, and her extraordinary beauty returned to its place. Ksiv v'adoni zok, and she said, after I'm withered, I'm going to have a child, and my Lord is old. Uksiv, but Hashem, when he said it, he said to Avram that Sarah said, V'ani zakanti, and I'm old. Deloi moisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem did not do it k'dekam re'i. She said that my Lord is old, but Hashem changed it that I'm old. So the Gemara says Hashem prevaricated in order that Avraham Avinu shouldn't hear that his wife called him old. Tana Rabbi Shmuel Gadol Shalom, Shafilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shina Boi. Even Hashem changed. Shenema v'titzchak Sarah b'ker Sarah laughed. Achrei v'loisi oisel li'edna v'adoini zakin. My Lord is old, and we're going to have a child. Uksiv v'yomer Hashem al Avram v'ani zakanti. And I'm old. Hashem didn't want that Avram should hear that his wife called him old. Now everybody points out, but he was old. He was 100 years old. He was 99 years old. He was old. But even so, you shouldn't call a person old. Vataymer, mi milel Avram. Who would have said about Avram, Heinika vonim Sarah, that Sarah would nurse children. Now that's a problem. Why does it say children? She nursed a child. She nursed Yitzchak. She didn't nurse children. Kama bonim Heinika Sarah. What does it mean that she nursed children? So Amar Reb Levi, there was a great miracle. Oisa Yom Shegamal Avram Es Yitzchak B'nai. The day that Avram weaned Yitzchak, Asa Suda G'dayla. They made a great feast. And Hayakol Umas Ha'olam Meranim V'Aimrim. And all the nations said and were murmuring, Re'isim Zaken is a Kenyan. Did you see this old man and woman? Sheviu Asufi Minashuk. They brought in a foundling. They didn't have a child at this age. They brought in a foundling from the market. They claim that it's our child, and in order to popularize it, they're making a big feast to prove what they're saying. So what did Avram do? He invited all the bigwigs. And Sarah invited their wives. Each one brought her child. And they were instructed not to bring a wet nurse. When a miracle happened with Sarah, and her breasts opened up like two fountains, and she nursed all the children. Yet, even if she gave birth at 90, Avram ben Meir Shana, could you believe that Avram gave birth at 100? So Hashem changed the appearance of Yitzchak that he should look clearly like Avram. So Pasku Kulam Ba'amru, they had to admit Avram Hoylides Yitzchak, that Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. Now, Ad Avram, Lo Yazikna. Until Avram, there was no old age. There was no discernible old age. So Manda Ava Boy Mishtoi Ba'adi Avram, when someone wanted to speak to Avram, Mishtoi Ba'adi Yitzchak, he would speak to Yitzchak because Yitzchak looked like Avram. And Manda Mishtoi Ba'adi Yitzchak, when he wanted to speak to Yitzchak, he would turn to Avram, Mishtoi Ba'adi Avram. So also Avram Boy Rachmei, Avram came and asked for mercy, and it came old age. Shenemar Avram Zokain, Avram was old, Baba Yom. Ad Yaakov lo have a chulsha. Until Yaakov, there was no feebleness, no weakness before death. So Yaakov wanted people to have a sign that they should know, to be able to prepare, to be mitzvah to their family, and to have the family around them when they die. So also Yaakov, Boy Rachmei, he asked for mercy, V'avi Chulsha, and it became weakness. Your father was sick. Until then, people would just sneeze and die. That's why when a person sneezes now, they say Gesundheit or Asusa. Ad os Elisha, until Elisha came, lo havi decholish v'ispach. There wasn't a person that got deathly ill and got healed. Also Elisha boy rachmei, he asked for mercy v'ispach, and he was healed. Shenem of Elisha chola es cholya asher yamas by. And Elisha became sick with the sickness which he would die from, which implies that there was other sickness that he didn't die from. Mechal dechala choli achrita, he died other sickness that he didn't die from. Indeed, the Gemara tells us that there were three sicknesses. Tana Rabbanan, shloisha chalon chala Elisha. Elisha had three bouts with sickness. Echad shedachafay legechazi b'shtei yadav. Gechazi did a terrible thing. Elisha had him cure Naaman from his saras, and Naaman wanted to give a reward, and Elisha said he's not taking it. And Gehazi went back and said that Elisha changed his mind and said to take it, and he gave him a reward, which is of course not true. Elisha didn't say that. So when Elisha found out, he cursed him that the tzaras of Naaman should cleave to him and his descendants forever. So because he pushed away Gehazi with both hands, he got sick. Ve'achad shegira dubim batinoikis, children harassed Elisha, and he incited bears, and 42 children died. And from that he also became sick. Ve'echad shemeispai, and then there was the sickness that he died from, shenemer ve'elisha chala escholyai asher yamusubai. So now the Gemara tells us about the story which we said where the children invited them and said that they would give them food. So he told his children, before they start, say Emalem, to go and tell them, only have a claim, ela pas v'kidneas, only for bread and legumes. So now the question is, did he mean bread of legumes or bread and legumes? So Amalei Rav Achmed Rav Yosef Rav Chisda pas kidneas tanan. Did it mean bread made from legumes? Or pas v'kidneas tanan? Or did it mean bread and legumes? Amalei ha'alekim, by God, tzricha vav. There needs to be a vav. It's bread and legumes. Ki mordia delibrais, and you should make the vav as big as the oars that are used to bring boats across the river Librais. So in other words, it's end, bread end. Shimon Gamliel Aimer ain't a tzarech. You didn't need to stipulate that because hakol kaminig amadina. Hakol esiyemai. What does hakol come to include? Says the Gemara lasiyei hadit na nasaycher es apayel. If you hire a worker, v'aimulay, and you tell him ke'echad, I'll pay you like one of the workers, or kishnayim ibnei ayer, or I'll pay you double of workers. So, what kind of work? He didn't specify. Nice like he only has to give him like a worker or double of a worker that's getting paid minimum wage. Div Rabbi Yeshua. You do a compromise, not like the cheapest and not like the most expensive, but a compromise or an average between the workers. That's what you have to give. Now, there is a halacha that when you work with somebody in the field, you could eat while you're working, but you could only eat when you're doing the finishing process. You could eat while you're harvesting the grapes or harvesting the olives or cutting down the figs. You can't eat if you're weeding in the field. So the following could eat biblically. If you're working with stuff that's attached to the ground when you're doing the finishing work, and if you're working that which is cut off from the ground, you could eat and you don't have to worry about tides until its process is finished, because then you can't eat because it has to be tied. And all of this is only when you're working with stuff that grows from the ground. The following cannot eat. If you're working with stuff that's attached to the ground, like Rashi says, if you're weeding onions, so you're working it before it's cut from the ground, you can't pluck and eat. If it was already finished, let's say there were cakes of figs that were already made into cakes and then they unraveled and you were hired to put them back together, since it was already finished, you're not allowed to eat. And you can't eat if you're working something that doesn't grow from the ground. For example, if you're milking a cow or making cheese, you're not allowed to eat from it. So the Gemara says, Minani Mili, 3 lines from the top of Daf Pei Zayin Amid Beis, as we learn to give nachas ruach to the Eibishter, to fulfill the mitzvah about Tabam on this Hilul Reb Shimei Yochai should have Bimel Tziyosha for all of us. We should be gesund and have everything wonderful. So, the Gemara says, Minani Mili, how do we know that a worker could eat? When you come in the vineyard of your friend, you could partake. So the Gemara says, Ashkechan Kerem, I only know a vineyard. Kol Milei Minala, how do I know a grain field? Gamrina Mekerem, we learn out from the vineyard. It's something that grows from the ground. And when its work is finished, he's allowed to eat. Let's say olives, let's say grapes, not grapes, we just said grapes, so olives, wheat, when it's finished, says, well, maybe not. Maybe he only gets this special grant in the kerem because from a vineyard there's already a chiyah for the balabayas to give the weak clusters that are very weak. They don't have a full amount of grapes. You have to give that to the poor. But we don't have that by other things. So the Gemara says, well, gamrinon mikama. We learn out from kama. So the Gemara says, how do we know by grain that he's allowed to eat? Kama gufei minalan. So he says that's another pasuk. T'chsiv ki savai b'kamas reyecha. When you come into the grain of your friend, the standing grain of your friend, v'katat the mililais biyadecha. You could cut off, pull off, not cut off, with your hands and eat it. Says the Gemara, well, maybe it's only by grain. Malakama sheken chayeves b'chala. Says the Gemara, umamaydai kama de mischayeves b'chala. Who says when it says grain, it's talking about grain that's chayev and chala? Dilma kol kama rachmana. It includes rice, it includes millet, which is not chayev and chala. Says, well, asya kama. We have exeris shava kama ksivacha kisava b'kamas v'yecha v'ksiv hasam, and it says by the mitzvah of the omer mehachel chermish b'kama, when the sickle starts to cut the kama. Ma hasam kama de b'chayv b'chala, barley is chayv and chala. Afach manami kama de b'chayv b'chala. So then I would only know the vineyard that's chayv and oilers, and grain that's chayv and chala. Says Gemara, ikal mifrach malakama shekain chayavus b'chala. So the Gemara says, yeah, but kerem yochiach. Kerem he's allowed to eat even though there's not no chala. Malak kerem that has oilus shekain chayav b'chala is kama teichiach. By grain there's no oilus, there's no weak clusters, and therefore v'chazer adin we go back and forth. Each one doesn't have the quality of the other. In other words, kama doesn't have oilus, and kerem doesn't have chala. Hatzada shavashabem, the common denominator is shekain davish gdulei kaka, grows from the ground, and when it's finished, the worker could eat it. Av kol davish gdulei kaka, what grows from the ground, when it's finished, but says in Ramala Tzad Shabashabem, the common denominator of grain and grapes. Shekain yesh bem tzad mizbeach. The grapes, wine goes on the altar with nesachim, and the grain goes on the altar with menachas. And you're right, we'll include also olives. Olives also, the shem and oil goes on the mizbeach with the menachas. So v'asanam izayis this beit tzad mizbeach. Says the Gemara, why do I have to learn out Zayas from a Ma'atzad? Zayas b'Ma'atzad osi? Zayas is called Karen. Hu gufe yikre Karen. Hu gufe Karen yikre. It's called Karen. It's included in the first pasuk, which says, Kisava b'Karen reyecha. D'chsev vayaver, and when Shimshon was destroying the Philistines, it says vayaver, he destroyed Megadish from the stacks of wheat, vad kama, the standing grain, vad kerem zayis. So you see, olive groves is also called the kerem. Says no, it's not called the kerem, it's called the kerem zayis. Amar papa kerem zayis yikre, kerem stamala yikre. Okay, but we'll know grain, olives, and grapes. But how do we know everything else? We call Makom Kasha. Now, Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra, V'chermish, it says a sickle, L'rabas kol baalei chermish, to include all things that are cut with a sickle. So anything that's being finished and it's cut with a sickle, the worker could eat. Says Gemara, but I need chermish for a different drasha. But v'hai chermish mebayilei b'shas chermish echol. You could only eat it when you're cutting it with the sickle, at the time when it's finished. Shalei b'shas chermish, but when you're weeding, lo yisechel, the worker can't eat it. Says the Gemara, no, hahu me'el kel yechol lo yisite nafka. The din is that the worker could eat, but he can't put it in his basket for later. But we learn out also that you're only allowed to eat it at the time of putting it in the basket. So therefore, we already know it's only at the time of the finishing. So chermish comes to include all that you're allowed to eat things that are cut with a sickle. So the Gemara says that still doesn't tell us anything. Teinach de bar chermish. That's good if it's cut with a sickle. The la bar chermish minalan. What about if he's picking fruit from a tree? So while he's picking the fruit from the tree, he's allowed to eat, but that's not cut with a sickle. El Amar Reb Yitzchak Amar Kra Kama L'Rabbis Kol Baalei Koima. Anything that's in full height, that's ripe. Aiva Amrit Kama Kama the Mechayva Bechala. We said we learn out Gzeira Shava Kama only things that are Chayiv and Chala. Sigmar says, yeah, but that was before we had the drasha of Chermash, of the sickle. Hani mili mikame dinesi Chermash. So Chermash includes anything that's with a sickle, rice and millet too. So that means that we don't learn out Kama to tell me only things that are Chayiv and Chala. Asja da'asi Chermash is Rabbilei kol dvar chemesh. It comes to include anything cut with a sickle. V'afagav deloy mechayev b'chala, even if it's not chayev in chala. So kama lamali. Then what do we do? Kama l'rabas kol bali kama. Anything that's in full ripening. Says the Gemara. Okay, then v'hashten nafkalon mechemesh mikama. Now that we learn out from the synthesis of anything cut with a sickle and anything that's fully ripe, then kisavai bekerem re'achal lamali. Then why does it have to say when you come into the vineyard? That's included already from chermish and kama. Amar Rava, you're right. That parsha is to tell you other halachas. Amar Rava lehil chaysav k'detanya kisavai, when you come in. Nemer kan bia, it says over here coming in. V'nemer lahalan lo yisavai alav hashemesh, that a night worker, you shouldn't delay paying him until past the next day's sunset. Now, since that pasuk is talking about a worker, it's talking about a worker. Afkan it's talking about a worker. And it's telling you that you shouldn't think that anybody that comes into the field can pop. Maybe kisava b'kerem re'acha means that if Michal Avram comes into my field, he could pop the grapes in his mouth, flushes grapes. So it's only if he works for me. B'kerem re'acha, in the vineyard of your friend, v'loi b'kerem kusi. But if you're working by a guy, not only are you allowed to put it in your mouth, but you're also allowed to put it in your basket. So that normally you're not allowed to steal from him. I know this you call a mishrei pile, that you're allowed to put it in the basket. But you're allowed to steal from him. You surely should be able to put it in your basket. When are you allowed to pop the grapes in your mouth? When you're working in the vineyard of your friend, but not if you're working in a vineyard of hektish. V'chalta, you could eat. V'loy moitzeitz anaven. You could eat the grapes, but you can't put it in your mouth, suck it, and throw it down. Suck out the juice and then throw it down. Because if you do that, you're going to eat more. And v'loy anovim v'davarachi, you could eat grapes, but you can't use salt to dip it in so that you get more hungry and eat more. Kinafshecha, kinefesh shel baal bayis, kach nafshay shel poyel. Like the balabayas, so also the worker. The din is the balabayas could remove and snack without taking tithes. Now I might think the worker, since he's granted it from the Torah, the rights to the Torah, maybe it becomes more permanent and he has to tithe it first. So the Gemara says no. Ma nafshecha oichel upater, he could eat, and the balabais could eat and he doesn't have to tithe. V'af nafshei shel poyel oichel upater. Savecha, you could eat till you're full, v'lo yachil gasa, but you can't overeat. You can't put it in your basket. So from there we learn only at the time when you're harvesting, when you're putting it into the baskets, that's when when you're allowed to eat. But when you're not putting it in the baskets of the balabayas, you're not allowed to eat. Wow, Rabbi say, what a good piece of work we did here on this wonderful evening. We're going to now immediately do the Mishnah Yaimis.